Hello and welcome to episode 6 of Navigating Net Zero in partnership with Arete Zero Carbon. I'm Sarah Uriel, consulting editor at CRN, and I'm delighted to be joined once again by Arete Zero Carbon's managing director, Dr. Stephen Finnegan. Hello, Steve.
Hi, Sarah. Good morning.
So last time we looked at scope 3 emissions and how they affect the whole channel and the supply chain. But this week we're looking at carbon reduction planning, explaining what it is and what channel firms should be doing. So I'll dive straight into my first question, Steve. Carbon reduction planning, where do you even start?
Okay, thanks, Sarah. So we're assuming at this point in time that the company has a carbon footprint measured, hopefully across all three scopes, 1, 2, and 3. And we're assuming at this point that the business is engaged, it's interested, and it wants to reduce the amount of carbon that the business creates. So where do we start? Now, most companies, from our experience, jump straight from having a carbon footprint right into setting a target. So the majority will say, well, okay, we know we emit 1,000 tons of carbon across our supply chain, and we're going to reach net zero by 2050. Completely the wrong thing to do, in my opinion. And the reason for that is because if you're setting a target and a target year, you have no real substance behind why it's 2050. You know, why isn't it February 2049? Like why we pick this date? And because it's popular to pick that date because the government set it. So we have to develop what we call a CRP, or a carbon reduction plan. And the main bit on where to start really is a counter question: is how ambitious do you want to be? Do you want to tick a box and say, yeah, we'll do all we can and we're going to be net zero by 2050 because everyone else is? Or do you want to be extremely ambitious and set targets within the business which are linked with science, so the science-based targets? So all of that depends upon the buy-in of the company. If you want to be a leader or a laggard, it depends if you want to tick a box or you want to become the most important business out there that has a real plan. But what's in a plan? It's very difficult and very daunting at first to establish a carbon reduction plan, but it takes a level of involvement that is quite large. There's a lot of negotiations, a lot of workshops you need to do. There's a lot of buy-in from the business that you need. So you start by assessing the level of ambition of the business, and if that is good, then fine. You can start your carbon reduction plan journey. This is a very long-winded answer, I know, but just to continue on that, if you have your scope 1, 2, and 3 carbon footprint, the very first step in creating a carbon reduction plan is finding out what you can control, what you can influence, and what is of concern to you. So let me just break that down a little bit. So a lot of companies that we work with, we've came up with this concept, and it wasn't actually me, it was a member of our team, Tom Johnson, who came up with it. So what are the bits within your supply chain that you can control? In other words, electricity you buy. You can decide to buy green through Rego. You can decide whether your company cars are EVs or not, so you can control all of that. You can only really influence your supply chain to a certain extent, upstream and downstream. And then there's other parts of your business which you just need to be concerned by. So depending on where you are on that journey in your plan, that's what you have to be mindful of before you set yourself a target to reduce that to zero. So to answer your question, very long-winded answer, but it is to get buy-in from the business and then to formulate your business, or understand your business in terms of what you can control, what you can influence, and what you need to be concerned by. And that is the fundamental start to developing a carbon reduction plan.
Yeah. Makes perfect sense. Is this something any size firm, even those on a tight budget, for example, can they do that?
So this isn't actually defined by budgets setting a carbon reduction plan. It's something that any company can do, even if there's, a micro SME of 5 staff through to a huge multinational business. So yes, you can do this, and you can calculate your own carbon footprint by following the greenhouse gas protocol. We went through this in previous sessions. You can map your supply chain, and you can literally draw boundaries around bits you can control, bits you can influence, and bits you need to be concerned by. And then it's down to the aspirations and the buy-in from the business. So let's pick an example. Let's pick a reseller who has 2 locations, and they simply buy in goods and then resell those goods on. So they can control where they're based. They can control the buildings they're in. They can control, as I mentioned earlier, whether they use company cars, EVs or not. How can they influence that supply chain? Well, they could pick couriers, which give them statistics on the carbon footprint of goods coming in. They could look at a variety of different things upstream and downstream that they could change. And really, they can only really be concerned by the vendors, and they can't really influence HP, Apple, Lenovo, so on. They have to just be concerned by that. But they can give their customers information on what they're reselling and what they're buying. So that doesn't really cost anything. There's no real cost for the business there. It's just time. If we consider time a cost, then okay, there's a cost there. So really, and we've seen this happen across multiple SMBs. It's not really a time-bound activity. It's more who's committed to this within the business. And let's pick another quick example whereby we've mapped the carbon footprint of our business, and there are 7 key areas to reduce. So that could be, energy, procurement, waste, sales, whatever it is. And then you can apportion this to the team. So each member of the team has a role to play in looking and exploring ways in which they can reduce their part of their carbon footprint within that business. So none of that really costs any money. It would cost money, of course, if you bring in external consultants like ourselves to do all of that for you. But if you're committed, ambitious, you can do it yourself.
That'll be music to a lot of people's ears, because money is one of the biggest worries I think people have with all of this. Well, how much is it going to cost me?
Of course, yeah, of course.
So why is carbon reduction planning so important to the channel, and more importantly to the channel customers? Why does it matter to them?
Okay, so there's one word for this really: greenwash. So companies out there it's fine to measure your carbon footprint, and it's fantastic to set a target to reduce that. We will be net zero by this date. But that was 5 years ago now. It's changed. We now, it's about disclosure. It's about what aspects of your supply chain can you control, influence, and be concerned by, and can you make that public? So you could be a very small SME, and you could say, look, how can we have 5 staff, how can we possibly influence HP, Apple, Lenovo, whoever the vendors would be? Well, you can't. But there's probably bits within the company that you can. And by identifying those key areas and disclosing the bits that you control, there's no reason why they can't switch to a 100% renewable energy contract for the building they're in. Or if they're leasing a building, put pressure on the landlord to do that, for example. And there's no reason why they couldn't influence the supply chain, by lobbying and being part of support groups or whatever. So that's why it's important, is around, disclosure. So we're a small company, but we're doing as much as possibly can. Now that will play into the hands of and customers and end users who are looking to say, well, who should we work with? Who should we buy from? And if they can see a company that's okay, it's small, but it's doing a fantastic job, even though it's a tiny business, probably going to lead to more sales for them because they're doing the right thing. Let me take another quick example, PPN 0621. So public procurement note 0621, requiring anyone in the supply chain that's working for UK government has to have a carbon reduction plan. It doesn't matter on the size of the business, it just needs to have a plan. And the same for the NHS suppliers. Anyone supplying more than £10,000 worth of equipment to the NHS, you need a carbon reduction plan. So that's why it's important.
Definitely. So how can channel firms actually ensure they achieve something tangible?
So that's the next that's the next conundrum in this, Sarah, because we have a flurry of activity with a company that will go online and say, we've just mapped our carbon footprint. We've just taken the bold step to look at scope 3. We've just put a load of time and effort into doing this. Look, and we've disclosed it. Here's our footprint. And we're going to reduce all of this by 2050. And then radio silence.
Yeah.
And that's the issue is how do you contain, how do you contain that initial excitement within the business, and how do you push that and maintain momentum over the months and the years that go by? So some examples that we've used with some clients is things like Monday boards. I'm not a salesperson for Monday, but it's just one piece of software that's quite useful. It tracks progress. So imagine using the analogy we used earlier. There's 7 people in a business, and each person then has responsibility for their particular element. Well, can all that be tracked and reviewed quarterly? Yes, is the answer. We've done it and we've seen it work. You can use intensity ratios, which is quite common. So what you can do is you can say, well, this is our CO2 footprint per dollar of revenue, or per pound, or per euro of revenue. And our company's grown. We've actually doubled in size through a merger, acquisition, or just general growth. But actually our CO2 footprint's dropped. So our ratios dropped. So we can use these indicators to show progress and performance. Using some sort of management consultant speak as well, you can develop what's called a continuous improvement plan, or a SIP. So that's every month or every quarter, you go back, you say, okay, this bit was in our control, that's moved to influence. This bit that was in influence, we can now control. So you cannot have a carbon footprint and a carbon reduction target that remains static. It's just not going to work. Simple as that. So there's a requirement to continually adjust your strategy. Another effective way we've worked with a number of businesses, and it's very simple, but it's good, is to set short, medium, and long-term targets. So all the bits you can control go into your short-term targets, say 2 years. All the bits that you can influence, bits in your supply chain, well, that becomes your 2 to 5 year target. And things that you are concerned by, that's in your 5 year plus plan. So it's just simply a way of trying to compartmentalize the different aspects of your business and trying to look at all of these measures and what you can do. There's no point trying to lobby for things which are going to affect your business in 5 years' time. It's just a waste of time. So what are all the low-hanging fruits? What are things you can do in that control strategy that can help progress? And then you just continually improve and continually monitor. You reassess your carbon footprint annually. I mean, that's something, again, you could do yourself. And then you just look to improve constantly. But all of that, Sarah, going back to question 2, really, it's all time consuming and it's all effort, and goes back to what we asked in question 1 is, what's the level of ambition within the business?
Wow, well, that was a lot of information and some really great practical advice there, Steve. Thanks ever so much. Can't believe you've come to the end again. Short and sweet. We like it like that, don't we? Next time, we're going to be touching on the sometimes controversial subject of carbon offsetting. I know there's a lot of strong opinions about this topic, so I'm looking forward to that one.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I mean, it's pretty fascinating what's happened in the last 5 years with carbon offsetting. Some people saying it's like the Wild West. There's so many schemes that have happened, so many failed programs, and it's a real shame because there's so many good options out there as well. And the Science Based Targets Initiative, accepts carbon offsetting as a feasible way to achieve that 2050 reduction target. So it's really important that we look at this and we give it some time.
Absolutely. And as ever, if anyone's got any questions, or especially about carbon offsetting, do get in touch before our next episode. And as always with these things, Steve is the expert, and he's always willing to help. So do get in touch with him if you're looking to do anything. If you need some help, Steve is the one to contact. So get in touch with him, and he'll definitely help you there. So that's it. Thank you very much, Steve, and thank you everyone for watching. Goodbye. See you next time.
Thanks, Sarah. Bye bye now.